Within the first week, we announced as a government the doubling and the broadening of the Indigenous loan program.
Tonight, Liberal leader Mark Carney makes his first stop in Winnipeg during the election campaign. What he had to say about his commitment to Indigenous peoples.
We look forward to also talking with them, talking with their entire teams, and having their candidates speak to First Nations people on the ground.
The National Chief of the Assembly of First Nations stops by to speak about how important First Nations voices are in the 2025 federal election.
These are future leaders we're talking about. We're talking about one day they're going to be sitting in big seats themselves.
And in the Northwest Territories, youth are getting together to discuss ways to improve their communities. Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to APTN National News. Liberal leader Mark Carney was in Winnipeg today. In between talks of tariffs and affordability, he was questioned about his commitments to Indigenous peoples this election. APTN's Sierra Bettens has more.
On day 10 of the 2025 campaign, Liberal leader Mark Carney made a stop in Winnipeg, home to the largest urban Indigenous population in the country. However, his itinerary did not include a policy announcement for Indigenous peoples or public meetings with them. While taking questions, Carney was asked what that signaled about his party's stance on reconciliation.
On the day that I was sworn in, acknowledged the fundamental role of First Nations, Inuit and Métis peoples to the founding of our country. Within 2.5 days, I was in Iqaluit with the Premier and meeting First Nations. The Inuit people and the Métis. Within the first week, I met with all the leaders of the Indigenous organizations. Within the first week, we announced as a government the doubling and the broadening of the Indigenous loan program.
Carney has spoken extensively about speeding up mineral extraction and energy projects during his campaign. APTN asked how he plans to affirm First Nations' right to consultation and accommodation.
And when I speak of projects of national interest, when I speak of, for example, critical mineral extraction, which is a tremendous opportunity for this country, but can only proceed if there is free, prior, and informed consent. Only proceed, in my judgment, if there's full participation from First Nations groups.
APTN has requested an interview with Carney on multiple occasions throughout his Liberal leadership and 2025 federal election campaign. He has never been made available. Sierra Bettens, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
The chief of the Liard First Nation in southern Yukon is being criticized by several members of his council. Last year, the same members of council said they lost confidence in his leadership. Now they have a new set of allegations against him. Here's Sarah Connors with the latest.
Liard First Nation council members are accusing Chief Stephen Charlie of attempting to use band resources to pay for a lawyer for his brother-in-law. The allegations about Charlie stem from a band council resolution shared on social media by 5 other members of council. In February, Councillor Susan Megan's partner, Perry Wolftail, was ticketed for wasting meat under the territory's Wildlife Act. Liard's deputy chief told APT News Megan is Chief Charlie's sister. The resolution states Charlie, Megan, and Councillor Ed Broadhagen held a meeting on March 17th where they approved retaining legal counsel for Wolftail's charge. It also authorized Charlie and Wolftail to instruct the law firm regarding the defense of the charge. But the First Nations Deputy Chief Harlan Schilling believes that's a conflict of interest and an inappropriate use of band resources. Schilling says the rest of council was not informed of the meeting, nor was proper quorum reached, and that Charlie ultimately dropped the resolution after receiving pushback from council.
Stephen tried to tell us that, this was done transparently with all of council, and it's just blatantly, we had to say, no, this was not.
APTN National News reached out to Charlie, but he declined to comment. This isn't the first time he's come under fire. Last fall, the same members of his council said they had lost confidence in Charlie's leadership, accusing him of workplace bullying, ethical violations, and several other allegations. In December, over 100 band members attended a community vote to remove Charlie from his position, but so far, those efforts haven't been successful. Sarah Connors, APTN National News, Whitehorse.
As the Indigenous community in Winnipeg continues to process the news of a search of a second landfill, leaders are starting to work together to expand that search to include another First Nations woman that is believed to have ended up there over a decade ago. With more, here's T.R. Wheatley and a warning some of these details may be upsetting to viewers.
The Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs are making a public plea to include Tanya Neepanak in the humanitarian search of a city-owned landfill just 6 days after a second searchlight was announced to look for one of 4 First Nations women brutally murdered by a serial killer in spring 2022. Winnipeg Police, the province, First Nations leaders, and MMIWG families came together on March 26 to say Muskade Bejike Ikwe was identified as Ashley Shingus, and a search of the Brady landfill south of Winnipeg would happen soon to try recover her remains.
The update that we're here to provide will undoubtedly trigger strong emotions.
Emotions all too familiar for another family that attended and left early as they were reminded of their missing loved one believed to have been killed by another serial killer over 13 years ago. It's believed that Tanya Neepanak also ended up in the Brady landfill. On what would have been Tanya's 45th birthday, her family and advocates took to the streets with renewed calls to search for her.
Consider the landfills as a crime scene and stop putting trash on our loved ones.
She was 31 years old when she was last seen on September 13th, 2011. In June 2012, Sean Lamb was charged with second-degree murder for Tanya, but those charges were later stayed. He went to prison for killing 2 other Indigenous women. Derek Neepanak is the chief of Minnegojabi Anishinaabe and a relative of Tanya. He was also AMC Grand Chief back when she went missing. He said in the fall of 2012, WPS searched the landfill for roughly a week.
But determined very quickly that it was beyond the scale and the magnitude that they could do at the time. We had difficulty accepting that. I have been quietly speaking with other leadership, saying, you cannot proceed with a search of any of the landfills without including Tanya Neepanak. I know her children need this to happen. I know her former partner, Vernon, needs this to happen.
Answering questions from reporters last week, AMC Grand Chief Kyra Wilson said her organization hasn't forgotten about Tanya.
Of course, this is a conversation that we do need to have. And what I will say today is, we hear a strong message that we don't leave anybody behind.
Manitoba's premier was also asked about whether or not the search at Brady landfill would include Tanya. He didn't flat out say no. Instead, he asked that the public continue to support the Shingus family as they process the news. There's no expected timeline yet as to when the search at Brady will happen or what it will look like. T.R. Wheatley, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
And if you are affected by these stories, there are supports available 24/7 through the MMIWG support line. That number is 1-844-413-6649. A sexual assault trial in Manitoba for Christopher Travers began on Monday. He's the former chief of Lake St. Martin First Nation. And a warning, some of the details in this story are also disturbing. On Monday, Manitoba's provincial court heard that on December of 2023, Travers allegedly forced a young girl into a bathroom in his home in Winnipeg, where he is alleged to have taken photos of her and sexually assaulted her. The girl involved was only 8 years old at the time. Travers was arrested last year and charged with sexual assault, sexual interference, and child pornography. He has pleaded not guilty. Travers was first elected as chief of Lake St. Martin in July 2022. The Southern Chiefs organization has now listed Councillor Brad Beardy as acting chief. The trial is scheduled for 2 days. Authorities in Regina, Saskatchewan are warning the public about a person who's considered to be a high risk to reoffend sexually. The Regina Police Service says 48-year-old John Paul Thorne is living in a home in the Heritage neighborhood in Regina. Police will be supervising and monitoring Thorne's activities. Thorne has a criminal history that includes sexual offenses against female children. Upon his release, he's not allowed to consume drugs or alcohol, and he cannot be near places where children gather. Police warn the alert is intended to raise community awareness, and it's not to be used for unlawful activity against Thorne. The Assembly of First Nations has released its priorities in this 2025 election. We'll speak with the National Chief after the break. Welcome back. The National Chief of the Assembly of First Nations says the 2025 federal election could be the most significant election ever held in Canada. The AFN has released its priorities for the election, and Cindy Woodhouse-Nepenak says it comes amid serious economic and political risks and imperialist threats from U.S. President Donald Trump. For more on the election and the AFN's priorities, we spoke with the National Chief earlier today. National Chief, here we are on day 10 of the election, and the word Indigenous, never mind First Nations, have barely been uttered during the first week and a bit. How concerning is that for you?
Well, I think, I've been talking with all of the leaders over the past few weeks. They know that this document was coming, and, I think I challenge all of them to make sure that their campaign teams read it and include it in their platforms. And I think, that's how we're going to measure all these political parties. And so, we look forward to also talking with them, talking with their entire teams, and having their candidates speak to First Nations people on the ground. First Nations are our fastest growing population in Canada. They're 1.5 million strong now, and they're voting in every election now. I mean, the other thing I think we have to keep in mind, and we've been working with Elections Canada, is to make sure that there's enough ballots in First Nations communities, because over the past couple of elections they run out of ballots, and that's because our people are voting in high numbers. And I think if I was a candidate anywhere for any party in this beautiful country that we all share, the first place I would be is in a First Nation community.
National Chief, the AFN priorities document mentions that First Nations voices must be at the table of discussions about trade relations, pipelines, national energy corridors, things we have been hearing about. This seems to be a priority for two parties that are likely one of them to form government. Do you feel First Nations are generally supportive of these projects this time around?
I think First Nations want a seat at the table. And I think any smart company or any smart political party is going to make sure that they speak to First Nations as a full partner at the table. For instance, when it comes to the Council of Federation, or when the provinces and the federal government meet, they always meet with First Nations the day before. And it's always been like this. Other national chiefs have had to deal with this as well. And I lift them up for their hard work. But at the same time, they've also had to always fight to have our voices heard, and we're continuing to do that. And I certainly raised that with Pierre Poilievre. I've raised that with Prime Minister Carney, and of course Mr. Singh, to say, why are we always left out, or we're talked to a couple of hours before the actual meeting. For instance, on health last year, there was a $60 billion discussion on health, health transfers to the provinces. And then they come and talk to First Indigenous people, First Nations, National, the NIOs, the day before for a couple of hours. And then the next day they go into a closed door room and then they talk about the issues. And I think that type of colonialism in our country has to stop, because I know that we're fighting US colonialism, but we also have to fight against that within Canada. And I think that that's so wrong. We need a full seat at the table. And, we're going to have to continue to push for that. We can't be left out anymore, particularly when we're talking about who we are as a country. First Nations are here to help our country be the best that it can be. We've always fought for it, even from the War of 1812, looking back at history, and in every war, it's been First Nations people that are at the front lines, even though they're not required to, but yet they've fought so hard for the space that we all enjoy and love. And I think that it's important that our voices are heard. First Nations people are at the table. So thank you.
National Chief, I'm sure we'll be talking again during this campaign. Appreciate you taking some time here.
For sure, and we'll invite you to the debates or the discussions with the leaders. So we'll look forward to that. Thank you.
And you can watch an extended version of that interview on our website, aptnnews.ca. Well, today on April 1st, the Government of the Northwest Territories, or GNWT, is implementing their new Indigenous employment policy. The policy aims to prioritize the hiring of Indigenous peoples and roles within the territorial government, especially those already living in the Northwest Territories. The GNWT hopes that the policy will encourage more Indigenous applicants in the public services and will provide equitable opportunities for employment and career advancement. Latest statistics show that Indigenous employees make up only 29% of the GNWT workforce, compared to 49% representation in the Northwest Territories. The policy replaces the previous affirmative action policy, which had been in place since 1989. Time for one last break, but first, the Mohawk Council of Kanesatake ousted its Grand Chief and Chief last week. Kanesatake is a Mohawk community located just outside of Montreal. Our reporter Savannah Craig is looking into the situation.
Last Thursday, the Mohawk Council of Kanesatake posted on its Facebook page a community notice announcing that the position of Grand Chief and Chief have been vacated. The announcement says the Ethics Commission of the Mohawk Council of Kanesatake has confirmed that the position of Grand Chief, previously held by Victor Bonspiel, and the position of Chief, previously held by Valerie Bonspiel, have been vacated. APTN reached out to both sides involved in this matter and will be putting together a report for our viewers in the coming days.
Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. And just a few days ago, it was business as usual in Tuktoyaktuk, Northwest Territories, as Holly Carpenter shared a team photo of a team of dogs being mushed across the snowy landscape. Thanks for that, Holly. You can keep those photos coming by sending your pictures to share at aptn.ca for the chance to be our next photo of the day. Now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Starting on the East Coast, sun's out in Halifax at a high of +2, +1 in Fredericton. -17 for Kuujjuaq, snow and -7 in Nain. +1 in Montreal, 3 below in Val-d'Or. -1 for Sault Ste. Marie, 0 in North Bay and Ottawa. 7 in Thunder Bay, 0 for Sioux Lookout and Wawa. +1 with snow in God's Lake and Norway House. 3 with flurries in Winnipeg, cloudy and 3 in Dauphin. 3 in Regina, -1 with snow in Saskatoon. 0 in Meadow Lake, -6 in Stony Rapids. In northern Alberta, +1 with snow in High Level, -1 and cloudy in Fort McMurray. +1 in Edmonton, 0 with snow in Lethbridge. 11 in Vancouver, 12 in Kamloops. 9 for Prince George and Smithers. -3 in Old Crow, +7 in Whitehorse. -9 in Yellowknife, 2 below with snow in Norman Wells. -18 in Sax Harbor, 12 below and flurries in Paulatuck. -17 in Chesterfield, 15 below in Whale Cove. -23 in Resolute, 20 below in Iqaluit. Since February of this year, the Clecho Friendship Centre in Betchco, Northwest Territories, has been hosting a youth forum. Every 2 to 3 weeks, Betchco youth aged 14 to 29 meet here in the evenings. What began as a way to discuss ideas to improve their communities eventually evolved into a safe space for the youth. Here they feel free to open up about personal struggles and support each other through discussion and communication building activities. Marvin Apples is the youth coordinator at the Friendship Centre.
These are future leaders we're talking about. Like we're talking about like one day they're going to be sitting in big seats themselves. And let's get ahead of that. Let's develop those leadership skills. Let's develop all the stuff while they're still young. So that's what we're doing today. You know, like sooner or later they're going to fill in big shoes one of these days. So I'm hoping for that to continue.
Dene entrepreneur and community advocate Tim Carwell is our guest on an all-new episode of Face to Face right after the news tonight. Carwell is also the founder of Dreams Tree Community Investment, which provides funding to things like the arts and traditional healing. He says he hopes the investments amplify Indigenous communities and peoples.
That people that maybe have a different opinion about how hard we work, the impact that we make, will see us differently. I hope that people that don't maybe know us as well will allow us some access to places that we haven't traditionally done. But the most important thing is language and culture.
You can catch our interview with Tim Carwell in about 90 seconds or so from now. We're all out of time for your APTN National News for this Tuesday, April the 1st already. You can stay up to date, though, with the very latest by visiting our website, aptnnews.ca. That's where you'll catch the whole interview with the National Chief. And Creason will also be here tomorrow with your first look at the day's news at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. I'm Dennis Ward. Marcy Miigwech, thanks for being with us. Face to Face is next. Have a great night.